Welcome and thank you for joining us today for the meeting of the New York City Health and Hospitals Capital Committee. Today's meeting is officially called to order. For the record, please note Erin Kelly is representing the Deputy Mayor Ann Williams Isom, and Karen St-Hilaire is representing Molly Wasso Park, both in a voting capacity. Please also note for the record that Sally Hernandez Pinheiro is participating virtually in a listening capacity. So I would like to propose a motion to adopt the minutes of the Capital Committee meeting held on December 4th, 2023.
So moved.
Let me get your vote, Dr. Katz,
Yes.
Erin Kelly,
Yes.
Karen St-Hilaire.
Yes.
Pagan, yes. So motion adopted. Next, we will hear the Vice President's report. Mr. Saiz.
Good snowy morning, everybody. I'm Manny Sayas from OFD. The last month of the year provided somewhat of an eventful one. Over the Christmas weekend, water and petroleum infiltrated our Women's Health Pavilion elevator pit in New York City Health and Hospitals Elmhurst. Our emergency vendor, along with our elevator maintenance vendor, responded and provided resources expeditiously to pump out and dry the elevator pits, and then we were able to identify and repair the cause of the infiltration, allowing the elevators to be placed back into operation. At New York City Health and Hospitals Lincoln Emergency Room, a psychiatric patient unfortunately was able to break a behavioral health sprinkler head, resulting in a massive amount of water distribution. Teams worked around the clock to stop the water and perform cleanup and repairs to allow affected areas to resume providing care to patients as quickly as possible. That was a very challenging event. As a result of the recent events at New York City Health and Hospitals Woodhull, we are in the process of working and identifying short-term projects that will address our resiliency needs and have a positive impact on the maintenance efforts to our facilities. We are approaching the final selection of vendors for our facilities work order system and expect to have further updates later in the year. This is a computerized system developed to help our staff across the system create and manage work orders for repairs, maintenance, and creation of ongoing management of preventive maintenance programs, reporting, and regulatory preparedness. We have 3 items for this month's board: the Just Home Project in collaboration with CHS, a request to award a contract for replacement of the roof at Woodhull Hospital in collaboration with CHS, and a request to award Jock Contractor for electrical construction services. So that concludes my report.
Good morning. Any questions from committee members? The report? No? So thank you. So we have 3 resolutions for today, so let's get started. Yeah.
Good morning. We're here to request the Capital Committee to approve New York City Health and Hospitals Corporation, the system to execute a 99-year sublease, including tenant renewal options, with Fortune Society Inc. or an affiliated housing development corporation formed for the transaction, Fortune, of the 6-story building 2 staff house containing approximately 55,000 square feet, and the land on which it is located measuring approximately 30,000 square feet, including surrounding grounds, on New York City Health and Hospitals Jacoby campus to be renovated to create a multifamily residential building with 84 units of affordable housing for households earning less than 80% of the area median income, community rooms, a lobby, an on-site social service suite, including 58 permanent supportive housing units for formerly incarcerated medically complex individuals who would otherwise be homeless, 25 units of affordable rental housing for low-income households, and 1 live-in supers unit at no charge, other than an annual lease servicing fee of $12,000 per year, increasing by 5% every 5 years, and authorizing the system to enter into a 15-year contract with Fortune to provide comprehensive on-site support services for the building's residents at an annual cost of $1,050,000 a year for a total cost over such term not to exceed $15,750,000. For some background, I can recap a little bit of history and how we're moving forward. In 2022, H&H launched the Housing for Health initiative to provide housing supports and opportunities for our vulnerable patients experiencing homelessness. One of our strategies is to use our land assets to provide an opportunity to create affordable and supportive housing for H&H patients and other New Yorkers in need. One of our contributions to this administration's housing plan, Housing Our Neighbors, is to offer our land for 650 units of affordable and supportive housing. We do that with our partners at New York City Housing Preservation and Development for the financing of these projects, and we work with our local facilities for land access and continuity of care. Next slide, please. For some history, there are 10 multifamily residential buildings that are affordable and supportive on H&H land that ground leased to private developers who all receive their own financing to build or renovate these properties. To recap, Kings has 3 buildings, Metropolitan also has 3, Queens has 1, where we launched Housing for Health over a year ago. Seaview has 1, and Woodhull has 181. If you recall, during COVID, I brought the system brought the Woodhull Phase 2 ground lease, where Communal Life was both the developer and service provider for 93 units. 56 were supportive, and those will come online by the end of the year. And we're really excited to get our patients into that housing. Next slide, please. Ellie's gonna turn it over to my colleague Ellie Epstein from Correctional Health Services, who's gonna talk more about the need for this particular housing model.
Awesome. Thanks, Leora. Good morning, everyone. I'm Ellie. Thanks again for having us. So as you know, Correctional Health Services provides healthcare and wraparound support to people in the New York City jail system. The vast majority of our patients actually don't go to prison, but rather return home to the 5 boroughs, and we work hard to ensure that they have a smooth transition, or as smooth as it can be, and to try and facilitate continuity of care planning. Unfortunately, many of our patients, almost 30%, actually report being homeless. And, housing is a challenge for everybody, but is a particular challenge for our patients with complex medical needs, as they're really ill-equipped to navigate the shelter system. Existing housing programs are not designed to support them, and yet most don't actually qualify for skilled nursing homes. So the Just Home program has been conceived in order to meet the needs of this cohort of patients. Just Home will be a first of its kind permanent supportive housing project for formerly incarcerated New Yorkers with significant medical needs. Next slide, please. So as I just mentioned, I just want to clarify, Just Home is going to be permanent supportive housing. So what that means is that the apartment unit is affordable and comes with a lease, and that there are wraparound social services provided to the resident of that unit. By providing stable, safe housing with on-site social services and close proximity to clinical care, we can help prevent this institutional cycling that some of our most vulnerable patients face. So 70% of the units in the building will be reserved for former CHS patients and are supported programmatic units, meaning that the residents of those units will be referred by CHS based on their clinical needs and/or the level of support they need for their activities of daily living, as determined by our clinicians. And I just want to take a note, because I think this has been a really confusing point. Although individuals will be considered for housing while they're in custody, meaning they're pretrial detainees or they may be city sentenced, they cannot move into housing and will not live in this housing unless they've been released from custody. So in addition to identifying potential residents and facilitating their applications, Correctional Health Services is also providing funding for the provision of case management, care coordination, and tenancy support services to those residents. So the remaining 30% of units are not considered supportive housing units, but they're rather affordable units that are available to the public. Leases for those units are awarded via the New York City Housing and Preservation Development's Housing Connect service. Next slide, please. So in 2022, HPD designated the Fortune Society to be the developer of Building 2 on the Jacobi Medical Center campus in order to create Just Home. They were chosen from an RFQ that pre-approved 44 developers, and Fortune is uniquely qualified to be the developer and provider for this project, and we're super excited about working with them. Fortune is an incredible nonprofit that focuses on supporting people with lived experience of the criminal legal system. The majority of their staff are people of color, and over half have lived experiences that directly reflect those of our patients. They've been serving this community for over 55 years and have been a direct provider of housing for their clients for over 20. They're one of CHS's most important reentry providers, and in fact, we refer patients to them daily, probably as I'm speaking. So most recently, they opened the Mandela Community, a permanent supportive housing project for 57 justice-involved seniors in the Bronx. And just a note, Fortune maintains that building, provides the security, and delivers social supports to everybody in that community. So I'm going to turn it back over to Leora to talk about the property they'll develop, and then I'll come back to some of the services.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So we went over some background on Housing for Health and then the vision for this program, which is two parts, a ground lease and a service contract. So I'm going to flip it back to the ground lease for just a few slides. This is building 2 on the western side of the campus. It's an underutilized building. This building will be renovated, and I'll go into that in a minute. And it will get a new address change away from Seminole Avenue, and the address will be Pelham Parkway. Next slide, please. The Fortune Society will execute a 99-year ground lease for this building. They will pay H&H $12,000 a year as a lease servicing fee, escalating by 5% every 5 years. This is just to account for the work that we do to get this transaction done, and it doesn't overburden the project, which is affordable and supportive and uses a great deal of city resources. Fortune will be required to renovate this building. As we said earlier, as 83 units of affordable and supportive housing, they are solely responsible for the building operations. They will own the building. They were responsible for collecting the rent and repairing the roof one day in the future and dealing with the boiler and everything about it. They're also responsible to secure all the loans for the financing for this property. They will create a separate single-purpose entity to borrow the money, and they will receive private money, but they will also receive likely 50% of this $40 million is going to come from the city, and we're grateful for our partnership with HPD. We have no obligation in this renovation. We're not taking on the debt for this renovation. Fortune or its single-purpose entity would take that on. Next slide, please. As we said earlier, this is the unit distribution for the building, 58 supportive, 25 affordable market. That will be through New York City Housing Connect. HPD will mandate a 60-year regulatory agreement for their substantial city capital subsidy into this project. All tenants will have a rent-stabilized lease. The supportive tenants will also benefit from an HPD rental subsidy, which is a fantastic benefit of working on this project with HPD. In addition, they will receive the services that Ellie will go into in more detail. The service contract and the rental subsidy are 15 years because they are part of the city's 1515 supportive housing program. The money that Fortune will receive from HPD is part of the supportive housing loan program term sheet. So all of this is in form of typical supportive housing projects that HPD does throughout the city using 1515. Next slide, please.
So under the service contract with CHS, Fortune will deliver services to the 58 people who will live in the Just Home programmatic units. These services will ensure that former CHS patients with complex medical needs and/or functional impairment are able to remain housed, build and maintain a social network, obtain government benefits, and remain engaged in healthcare. Fortune will employ a team of licensed clinical social workers, peers, case managers, and housing specialists to ensure that residents are able to manage their daily needs, maintain their apartments, and access treatment. Fortune will also ensure that there is 24/7 security on site, maintaining a secure front desk post at all times, in addition to having cameras around the property. So although this represents a greater level of security than most residential buildings, certainly my own, it is considered standard and best practice for supportive housing developments. So in addition to making sure everyone's needs are met, Fortune will also host pro-social events, such as movie nights and cooking classes, available to all residents, including those in the affordable units. And the services funded through this contract, we expect will be augmented by Medicaid-funded in-home services, and that they'll also be able to leverage the incredible community-based resources that H&H makes available to all of its patients. Next slide, please. So in supportive housing projects, the nonprofit developer is almost always the provider of services, and certainly that's true in Fortune's case. They are the sole service provider in all of their properties. That's considered best practice and is mirrored in other projects, such as the ones by Communal Life. And we're really excited about that. Fortune is an incredibly experienced housing provider, and they are also only one of 3 nonprofits to have been awarded by the DOHMH a justice-involved supportive housing contract. So we're seeking approval to enter into a 15-year contract with the Fortune Society to provide the Just Home supportive services. Contract does not go into effect until Building 2 renovation has been completed and is ready to actually have tenants move in. Contract award is about $1 million a year for a total of $15.75 million, which is funded by CHS and actually has been baselined into our budget. And this funding level and the 15-year cycle, as Leora mentioned, is very standard and comparable with what is offered through other city supportive housing projects. And finally, just acknowledging that we received CRC approval for this project, for this contract in October. Next slide, please. So to close, we just wanted to share the projected timeline for this project. Again, back in July 2022, HPD designated Fortune as the developer of Jacoby Building 2 in order to create Just Home. Since that time, we've worked with HPD and Fortune to meet with elected officials, the Jacoby Hospital Community Advisory Board, and Community Board 11. We've also attended and hosted a number of community meetings, and then most importantly, as required, we did host a public hearing at Jacoby Hospital on December 13th for this project. So if the Capital Committee and Board approve the ground lease and service contract for Just Home, the next step is to move forward with the necessary City Council vote this year. And upon receiving approval from the City Council for the ground lease, Fortune will then be able to proceed with the Department of Buildings review and securing financing. So our hope is to have the ground lease executed towards the end of the year so that construction can begin with a goal of having patients move in sometime in 2026, at which time we would then execute the service contract. It's admittedly a complicated project, lots of moving pieces and parts, so I just want to acknowledge that the timeline is subject to change. I think what's most important, and I just want to center and close with, is that the need for this housing is not going to change. Unfortunately, this has been a long-standing gap and a desperate need amongst our patients. And so this is really an important and special opportunity to provide housing for some of our sickest patients so that they can live in dignity and comfort and get the care and support that they need and deserve. And I'm just very grateful for everyone's consideration and partnership to get us to this place today. So next slide, just to conclude. To remind everyone, we're asking the Capital Committee today to approve a 99-year ground lease for Building 2 at Jacoby Medical Center to the Fortune Society, and to allow CHS to enter into a 15-year contract with Fortune to provide the wraparound services for residents of the Just Home programmatic units. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Any questions from committee members? I have a set of questions. Okay, so let me go. I received questions from Frida Wang and Sally Hernandez Piñero, so I'll try to combine. Some of them are similar questions. So and the first one actually came from both, and it's about the sublease for 99 years. So it talks about renewal options, one of the clauses. So how does that look like once the 99 years go by?
It's a good question. It's up to, we have typically in the past done 99-year leases, or sometimes we do a 60-year lease with a renewal up to 99 years. So we're accounting for the maximum term in the agreement. Jeremy, do you want to add anything to that?
So it's up to 99 years. The tenant options accumulate to 99 years. So the spacing of those options are subject to negotiation. They're not critical. They're all options to be exercised by the tenant. So we assume that they will be exercised. And so to us, the important thing is the 99 years. How the option terms get divvied up within the 99 years is less important.
It's important, though, that the ground lease is coterminous with the HPD regulatory agreement, which will be a 60-year regulatory agreement. So I don't think we should be keen on have something that is misaligned with our city partners who are investing in the project.
Okay, thanks. And then, so in the sublease resolution, I'm trying to read this. The resolution states it is Fortune or, quote, or an affiliate housing development corporation formed for the transaction. Please describe the parameters of this potential affiliate. Must it be wholly owned subsidiary or affiliate of Fortune, or could they bring in partners? If so, what diligence and rights of approval do we have over the other participants? Must it be nonprofit? Like what's,
Virtually all of these HPD finance deals are done with Housing Development Finance Corporations, HDFCs. They're formed under the Housing Finance Law, and as such, they qualify for certain tax exemptions in the recording of documents, and they're eligible for to participate in HPD loan programs. So the way these deals generally work is that we start with the principal, the developer that is the underlying party. Then in the course of the deal, the developer forms an HDFC to be the named tenant to qualify for these criteria. And then, generally speaking, there's, all these deals work off of an HPD standard term sheet. So HPD has a couple of iterations of these term sheets. They are kind of the financing Bible of the deal. So the term sheet specifies for a certain amount of HPD financing in the form of a mortgage. That's the bulk of the financing. Then there's a gap in financing which the developer is expected to fill with commercial loans. All the banks have community lending obligations, and so banks are eager to make these loans to affordable supportive housing development projects to fulfill their community lending obligations. And then another tranche of the investment comes from tax credit financing investors. So those tax credit financing investors generally come in to the deal and have some ownership participation. And so they are generally treated by HPD as if they were a lender. And so there are rules that govern who can lend, who can take a mortgage interest, and who can invest. There's a concept of a prohibited person in the lease and the regulatory documents. So these investors may not be so-called prohibited persons, which are small investment companies or companies that have some demerit on their record because of past experience with city government. And so the HDFC is the entity that's put forward, but behind it is a fortune society and these tax credit investors that take an equity position in a LLC that stands behind the HDFC.
I would just add one thing. You can't form an HDFC without permission of either New York City or New York State. So it's a single person entity, a single purpose entity. It's not a person. So they're not people. They need a shell to borrow, and New York City or New York State approve that formation. So it's either HPD or HCR. So they'll form that, and that will be the receiver of their loans and all the other funding sources that Jeremy described.
I think behind the question, people are saying, okay, you've sold us on Fortune, right? This has language that sounds like, could not be Fortune in the future. All of us understand 60 years, certainly I don't plan to be around in 60 years. The world can change, right? And I think what your answer is that yes, it could be something other than Fortune, but it can't just be anybody. It has to fit this very narrow and highly regulated format, and it has to be approved, I think you just said, by the city and the state.
Yes.
Is that a fair restatement of?
That's fair.
And one thing to add to that is that in the structure, there is one entity that is the active entity. The rest are passive investors. The active entity is Fortune. So it's Fortune that actually hires the people, administers the services, operates the building, and the other parties in the deal are passive.
But what if Fortune dissolves?
So then, Fortune is a party to a mortgage with HPD and a so-called regulatory agreement, and there are very strict provisions for who can succeed to those agreements, how they can be assigned, and this is a very, very regulated
Right.
space.
think
It's
that's the-
regulated both by the Internal Revenue Service, HUD, HPD.
I think that's the important part, that there always has to be a potential designee, because again, we're talking long time frames and the world is unpredictable. But that what's reassuring is that this is a very narrow regulatory area. And so if there is a successor, we can have confidence that the successor has had to go through a very strenuous process before they would be allowed to succeed.
Correct.
Exactly.
I have several questions here, so let's give me like brief answers to these questions. So for Fortune, how were they selected of the approved list, or how many were on that approved,
I
pre-approved
think Ellie
list?
mentioned it.
Yeah.
It was over 40 names were on the HPD
Okay.
pre-qualified list. HPD assesses capacity and pipeline for the designation.
Perfect. And then for the servicing fee, the $12,000?
I think before I arrived, I realized H&H needed, we invest a lot of time in these projects, and that just felt like something of $1,000 a month to support the work that we put into it without overburdening the project.
And other agencies that play a part, such as HPD, charge a fee. So Leora noticed, oh gee, this is odd. No fee is charged by Health and Hospitals. The fee is a somewhat arbitrary fee. It's intended to be, modest, not to overburden the project, but to provide some subsidy or some reimbursement for our overhead expenses in arriving at these deals.
So I have a set of questions here connected to the service contract, the 1,000,000 annual cap. What happens when that's not enough? How do you?
So as I
Tell us
mentioned,
again.
yeah, absolutely. So I just want to start by acknowledging that that is actually a little bit, not hugely, but a little bit more generous even than what is standard provision for comparable city supportive housing funds. So it is an award that the city thinks is appropriate and is enough money. But we recognize this as a patient population with some unique challenges and needs, and we anticipate that there will be a lot of opportunity for Medicaid-funded services. So for example, residents that may require home health aid or need sort of a higher level of care, whether that's a visiting nurse service, all of those things can be funded and paid for through Medicaid. So it's not that we imagine that the $1 million is the only money funding anybody who comes into the building. We do anticipate that there will be other sources of funding that can be leveraged by Fortune Society.
So I think I know what happens on this one, but what happens after the contract expires in 15 years?
I mean, this,
So-
I would say the city has funded, I think City Hall could attest to this, I think over 7,000 units this way. It's a citywide initiative, and the idea is the city would step in. There are thousands of units on this same subsidy model, and that there would be a renewal.
And so a related question with the services contract. So Fortune will screen out applicants who do not agree to engage in programs, right? But once they're tenants, how do you require them to engage in programs?
Totally. So we wouldn't require somebody who, once they're in a unit, they've signed a lease, they're not required to engage in programs. But again, I think what we're talking about is a small patient population that CHS comes to know very well. We're providing care and social services while they're in custody. And so there's sort of a preliminary screening that CHS is providing, which is both a look at sort of the clinical needs of this particular individual, but also, is this somebody who wants to live in community? Not everyone wants to be in this kind of a residence. If that appears to be something that's attractive to that individual, then they go to Fortune, and Fortune completes their own very rigorous housing application process. And so the goal is, through that screening process, that people have either self-selected out and said, this does not sound like the right kind of place for me. And some of our patients do say that. They're like, I'm not interested in movie night. I don't know how, but, and then, once they're in the building, yes, you can opt not to participate in services, but you cannot choose to be in breach of your lease. So certainly the minimal obligations of being a decent neighbor and paying your rent don't change.
Right, people can be evicted.
Yes.
And sometimes have to be evicted.
Yes.
Because their behavior interferes with other people or the community.
Yes, it's unusual in Fortune residences, but it is not unheard of, and that is, it's a legal obligation.
Good, okay. So please confirm Fortune carries all costs of managing the residential building, ongoing
Yes, I mean,
maintenance,
that's yes,
paying for the
they,
super, other building costs?
it's part of the HBD underwriting and the city subsidy. They own the building. They will receive the loan. They have to pay the fuel bills, the water bills, the super. Everything is on them, the loans and the building operations. We have no liability. I know that's the next question, Jose. We have no liability to the renovation of the property and the ongoing operations of the property.
I think the next well, you answered the next question.
Well, but I think you're supposed to read it.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Yeah, does the change have any exposure or liability to any financing that Fortune secures for the renovation of the building? So, but anyway, the next one is, could we adjust the proposed resolution language to be clear and consistent with the situation of what's described in the presentation? So there's some language here connected to,
I
keep things
think,
consistent so we can fix that
I
after,
think
right?
that in the resolution language, we neglected to include that the space that's being leased includes a lobby
Okay,
and a suite for the administration of services.
okay, so we will amend that.
So,
When it
so
gets
we're,
presented to the
so
board,
we'll
right?
amend the language so it conforms.
Okay, thank you. And there's some issues too connected to 50 versus 55 years and so on.
Just the
that we need to
typo
amend.
corrected.
Yeah, and same with some clarification connected to what staff refers to on the seventh. Actually, it's a seventh clause because I counted them. It says
No,
six.
no problem, correct. We'll
Yeah.
consider it corrected.
The point is that all the staff
So we'll give
involved
you-
is Fortune staff. No H&H staff is involved.
Yeah. So I guess you have the questions and you can address them. Any other questions or comments from committee members? Then let me then ask for the vote. Dr. Katz,
Yes.
Erin Kelly,
Yes.
Karen Hilaire,
Yes.
and Jose Pagan, yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
So the next one is Manny.
Good morning again, everybody. This is a request for a contract approval for Woodhall Outpost Therapeutic Project, authorizing New York City Health and Hospitals Corporation to execute a contract with Construction Corp. To undertake a roof replacement of New York City Health and Hospitals Woodhall Hospital as a part of Correctional Health Services Outpost Therapeutic Housing Units for a construction contract amount of $6,096,003 with an 11% construction contingency of $1,778,981 to bring the total construction cost not to exceed $17,874,984 with a project anticipation to start in March of 2024 for a duration of 12 months. And with that, I'll hand it over to Oscar Gonzalez.
Thank you, Manny. Good afternoon, Chair, Dr. Katz, and board members. I'm here with Patsy Yang, Senior Vice President of Correctional Health Services. As Manny mentioned, this ties directly with OTX housing units, Correctional Health Services, as part of a multi-phase program. The original program for Woodhall was to decant the 9th and 10th floor, relocating the services throughout the hospital. As a second phase and a prerequisite for design and construction, which will be reviewed by State Commission on Corrections and the Department of Corrections, is to implement a roof system to replace the roof to replace the roof on the 10th floor, but also to incorporate the foundational work of the outdoor recreational space of OTXHU. So it's a little bit complicated, but it's definitely a need. Woodhall has experienced several activities or issues definitely in the recent past. The existing roof has exceeded its shelf life. It is still serviceable, but it's costing way too much to maintain, and either way, it cannot be integrated into the current foundational system. So the integrity of the roof is vulnerable to the interior space. We don't want to do the interior without actually taking care of our envelope. And we definitely know that the roof is leaking in multiple areas, especially during the recent September 29th storms that we received. There were multiple water infiltration issues throughout the hospital, but definitely on the 10th floor, water was infiltrating in there. So incorporating a brand new capital asset, in this case the OTXHU program, could be put in jeopardy if we were to proceed with that first. So therefore, the roof system itself has to be the first thing that goes that gets implemented. The design for the roof has been completed since May 15, 2023. The total size of the roof system is 52,000 square feet, approximately. And it's a multi-layered system. It's got vapor barriers, it's got drainage mats and pavers and insulation. So it's a very complex commercial type roof system. It also has a lightning protection system, and as I mentioned, roof drains, storm drains, and a railing extension. The bids originally went out for an original a complete roof system to be replaced without the foundational work for the slab, but we did put an alternate option to include the outdoor recreational foundational work. So the bids were in our favor, and the schedule was in our favor as well, where the work will take place in approximately 12 months if we start in March 2024 and complete in 2025. We posted the procurement on City Record in October. 17 vendors did attend, but we only received 2 bids. And we made, in the middle of December, we determined that Zaman was the lowest responsible bidder. The next slide shows you essentially how the program is organized. We have Health and Hospitals, OFD, and CHS as the owner. Then we have ACOM as our program manager, and then we have APS, Architectural Preservation Studios, as our designer, and Zaman Construction, the firm that we want to enter into contract with to do the actual construction. Next slide shows you the project budget. So for design, $788,000. The construction base contract would be for $16 million, and we're adding 11% contingency, which is about $1.8 million. The industry standard is about 10%. On the last project that was relatively close or similar to this project, we exhausted close to our 10% contingency. That's why we're adding a little bit more, just to give us a little bit more. The project was fully funded by OMB at $18.6 million. There was a CP approved already for $11.6 million back in March. We do have an amendment at OMB for $7 million, and it's been there since October 13th. As I mentioned, the base contract would be for $16 million with a contingency of $1.8 million to total $17.9 million. Last bit of information, Zaman is a certified MWBE contractor, so we've discussed this already with the vendor diversity team. So this would be a 100% MWBE project. Zaman does not have any previous work with us. However, they did receive a good rating on the project that they did at MTA for $30 million, and an excellent rating for a project that they did for Department of Social Services, which was very similar in work, which incorporated roofing, paving, and facade work as well. With that, we'll be happy to take any questions.
Okay, any questions from committee members? And I asked you roofing questions before, so I'm gonna move to a vote now. Dr. Katz,
Yes.
Erin Kelly,
Yes.
Karen St-Hilaire,
Yes.
Jose Pagan, yes. Thank you so much. Resolution.
Okay,
Thank you.
Let's move to the next one.
Okay, good morning again. This is authorizing New York City Health and Hospitals Corporation to execute a requirements contract with Polaris Electrical Construction Corp. for a not to exceed amount of $8 million to provide electrical related construction services on an as needed basis at various New York City Health and Hospital facilities over a term of 2 years. Next slide, please. A little bit on the background, three electrical and mechanical HVAC contracts were awarded in 2022 to Genco, McFarnagale and Sons, and EIA Electric, but EIA Electric subsequently went out of business. We are looking to enter into a contract with one new vendor so that 3 active contracts are available to meet the demands throughout the system. Each of our contracts are for $8 million for a period of 2 years. Next slide, and with that, I'll hand that over to Menji and Don.
Thank you, Manny. So the procurement timeline, we opened bids on November 11th for one contract valued at $8 million to provide electrical construction services. The contract will be for a 2-year term. Polaris Electrical Contractor was the lowest bidder with a multiplier of 1.19. And Polaris has received a good rating in mocks from FDNY. They have no past H&H work. Next slide, please. So Polaris is not an MWB vendor, but they did submit a 30% MWB utilization plan with 2 vendors, Millad and Skyline, 10% with Millad and 20% with Skyline. Next slide. And this is the resolution. So happy to take any questions.
Any questions from committee members?
None.
Okay, so hearing none, let me take it to a vote. Dr. Katz?
Yes.
Erin Kelly?
Yes.
Karen St. Hilaire?
Yes.
Mr. Pagan, yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any all or new business to come before the committee?
None.
Hearing none, meeting adjourned. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Good job. It's nice to have you back, Jose.
This meeting is no longer being recorded.